It's Manage to Win podcast time again. We've got a great guest today. I want to start by recognizing our sponsor, Habitly.com, where you can learn the habits of highly successful people. What is success? Well, success is having great relationships with other people and achieving meaningful things in your life. We teach that on Habitly.com. How to set and achieve goals, how to be a great leader, how to communicate with others, how to be empathetic. Learn those habits and you're going to love life just a bit more, if not a lot more. Habitly.com, first 7 days are free. Today's episode is with Dr. Brad Harris. He is a professor of management and human resources at HEC Paris. Yeah, that's right, Paris, France. He's also the co-founder of People Leader Accelerator and the managing partner at Trailhead Consulting. Brad's a really sharp guy, and he's a good guy. And he gives some great tips to help you make certain you're going after or climbing the mountain you should be on. So what happens when you're a leader and you're kind of stuck? You know you can be achieving more, but you're not? Brad's got some great advice. Let's dive in. Brad, you're a psychologist. You're working with leaders. You're helping them grow beyond where they are today. What is the biggest brick wall that they run into that you found?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do consider myself an organizational psychologist. I got a PhD in organizational behavior from Texas A&M University. I focus on the micro issues. How do individuals lead other individuals? How do we work together in teams? More recently, I've been working a lot with early stage leaders at startups and scale ups. And so the answer sort of, it depends to your question. What is the one thing that trips them up? But I think if there was a common thread, it would be this idea that Marshall Goldsmith kind of put on the forefront of leadership books in that space several years ago, that what got us here won't get us there. And I think when we face uncertainty, when we don't know where we're going, we tend to lean into where we've been in the past and do the same things. And that's just really not sustainable when we're in a different role and we have a different responsibility. And we actually need other people to be doing all of the things while we set vision, we strategize, and these sorts of things.
Very interesting, because I just talked with a leader yesterday. I think it was yesterday. Might have been the day before. It's been a busy few days. Who is struggling with just that issue. And so what happened is the person got promoted into a bigger role. They now are managing a lot more people, accounts, that type of thing. And he said, you know what? I've always been really good at focusing, but right now I just can't focus. And I'm really struggling. This has been going on for 3, 4, 5 weeks, whatever it is. What do I do? So if someone's in that situation, what would you be advising them or asking them?
Yeah. So if you're in a coaching relationship, you spend like your whole session asking questions to people and hoping they get some perspective that figures this out, that helps them figure it out, right? Really, this is a matter in most cases of prioritization. Like, do you know, or does even your leader one level above you know the 3 things that actually add value for whatever your organization's doing? And I think a lot of times we hedge our bets and we assume like life is complicated. It's really complex. So I better do like 10 things just in case I don't know the right thing. But really, if you don't know the 3 things that add value and you can't winnow it down to the top 3 things or even 2 things, you're setting yourself up for a really difficult road ahead. So it's about prioritization. And I'll add something that's come up on your podcast several times. It's about making time to be strategic. Can you avoid your bias to action for at least a couple of hours a week where you can really sit down and be thoughtful about which mountain are we trying to climb anyway? And I like this mountain analogy because it's got all sort of analogs that we can apply to other areas of leadership. But really, when we're in the leadership seat, we got to remember a couple of things. Like, we cast a long shadow, we bring the weather, all these sorts of things. But really, our job is to tell our teams, which mountain are we climbing? How we actually climb the mountain's up for negotiation. We can debate all that stuff, but the choice of mountain is not up for negotiation. So that's where I fall on this.
So where does the leader figure that out? I mean, You probably have stories where, a leader was going after the wrong mountain. It's kind of funny. You think of a mountain climber and they're on the wrong mountain. It's kind of comical, actually. But what do they need to do when they realize, hey, wait a minute, I'm super busy, but I'm really not getting where I want to go, but they're still lacking some clarity on how to figure that out?
Yeah. I want to borrow a quote as sort of a preamble to my response here from Bob Johansen. The future rewards clarity, but punishes certainty. I've always kind of loved this idea. You've really got to wrestle with it for a second, because how can you be clear without certainty and these sorts of things? And your question sort of reminds me of this tension between clarity and certainty. I think it requires a lot of guts and boldness to step back and I'd be able to identify your mountain. So how do we do this? Well, a lot of times we're getting feedback, and a lot of times we're getting feedback we don't even realize that's out there for us. So the obvious place we get it is failure. Like when we screw up big, like we know about it, we can see it. People react poorly towards us. We do these postmortems, these after action reviews. We really pay attention and learn from our failure. Unfortunately, failure can also be deadly, not only for mountain climbing, but also, we might go under. Our business might not make it if we're only learning from failure. So we've got to be a little more proactive than that. So I think, if we're talking just about leadership approaches, like one of the best ways is self-awareness and building that through 360s, informal meetings, mentoring, this sorts of thing. If we're talking about strategic decisions, I guess it kind of depends on which level leader we're talking about. But if you're not the CEO, this means like you need to get in the room where all the decisions are happening, and you need to figure out what are the 2 or 3 things that actually drive business value. If you are the CEO, well, that's the loneliest job in the whole company. So this is where you have to really, you need a board of mentors, not just a board of directors. You need people that can help you. You need networks of people below you. You need to have frontward facing, customer facing people that in upward communication. So you need that bottom up communication, and you need people that have been in your seat that can help you see around corners.
Well, it's interesting what you say about that board of mentors, but it takes time to find those people. It takes time to prepare for those meetings, to have those meetings. How does someone balance all that, and kind of what's the upside that you've seen?
Yeah. It does take time. I'm glad you called that out. And one of the places we struggle when we kind of move into leadership roles or move up in leadership roles is that we don't really realize our shadow just got a little bit bigger, and the feedback we're getting from our direct reports and people that used to be our friends and our happy hour buddies has now gone through a filter before it gets to us, and it's not so useful. Perhaps I could give an example from someone that I look up to for maybe not leadership lessons, but just career aspirations. I'm not a musician, but I sure would like to be one. Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters. He's pretty well known. He wrote this book. He's got this like really fascinating story that when he was starting Foo Fighters post Nirvana, he had a drummer named William Goldsmith, not to be confused with the Marshall Goldsmith we talked about earlier on the podcast. But he had this drummer that was really good, was also successful, and Grohl was sort of a perfectionist. So Grohl was now the front man of Foo Fighters, singing, playing the guitar, but he's a drummer by trade. Anyway, he wasn't completely satisfied by how the tracks in the studio were going out. He knew he needed a drummer for the stage shows and this sort of thing. He got an opportunity that he probably should have passed up. His studio guys called him back and said, "Hey, we've got some more time here. We'd like to record some other tracks." And Grohl just said, "Okay, I'll lay down all the tracks by myself, including the drums." And while he was there, he went and re-recorded some existing tracks, and he did the drums on them. And then sort of probably sensing that he had done something wrong, he calls William Goldsmith and kind of tells him what he did. He's like, "It's for the better of the band. Don't worry about it, blah, 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 blah." I'm projecting my own beliefs on how this conversation went. And Goldsmith is pissed. He said, he's like, "Screw this. I'm not doing it." And he quits the band. And that's not sustainable. You can't be a rock band and go on tour if you don't have a drummer that's any good and is willing to play with you. So fast forward, they get this guy now, the late Taylor Hawkins, to play drums. Coincidentally, before they record, Hawkins has an encounter with somebody. I forget who, someone really famous, maybe Axl Rose, who says, "What's it like playing drums for the greatest drummer of the 1990s," or something like this. And this just puts Hawkins into imposter syndrome mode, despite his being like a really accomplished musician at the time. And he screws up on a drum track or something in the studio, and Grohl says, and so Hawkins actually says, "I can't do this, man. Can Dave just go back and lay down the drum track after I'm done? Like, I don't care." Grohl, whether it was intentional or not, had apparently learned something from his prior experience and says, I cannot be the perfectionist. I cannot be this person that screws up everybody else's willingness to take ownership and be vulnerable in these situations. And he basically makes Hawkins play the drums. And only later does Grohl put it together that this was like sort of a growth moment and sort of a reflecting moment. And I think we go through those as leaders too. Like a lot of times we have to realize like our perfectionism, our desire to our strengths, all of these things that got us here are no longer sufficient if we're trying to do something like create one of the biggest rock and roll bands or one of the biggest startups or one of the best value-adding organizations in the world.
It's very interesting, the power of making a mistake. And what you've alluded to or said straight out, separate of the story, is that, when you make a mistake, you actually pause and you think about it and you evaluate it and you post-mortem it, that type of thing. What do we have to learn? And yet at the beginning of the podcast, you said, one of the biggest things is if you do that on the front end, before you make the mistake, if you spend that time regularly for strategy. And in your experience, when you're working with leaders and you're coaching them or maybe training them, I mean, you've got a lot of experience, different ways you're working with people, to spend that time and really figure out which mountain they should climb. How much time is that? I'm back to time again, but how much time is that, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it would be a win if I could get the people that I work with to spend over the course of a whole week 2 hours of not doing stuff and just focusing on this. That is a really arbitrary number, but we'll do 50 minutes of coaching and then maybe it spills over to an hour. I make them commit to spending 90 minutes after the coaching to do something. My bet, having coached for over a decade, is if I'm asking for 90 minutes, it's a very select few of people that are actually giving me 90 minutes. So I'm saying 2 hours total. We can even include the coaching in there. That would be that'd be a really good start for me. And maybe one story that could help us think about this in a more high fidelity way is, there's this article that I use in my teaching. It's by Francesca Gino of Harvard and a colleague or two. It's called "Why We Don't Learn from Success." And in this article, she gives this really vibrant story about motorcycle racing and on the European racing tour. I know nothing about this space, so maybe you can. But there's this new team on the block, and it's a really well-known name brand in the motorcycle space, Ducati, and they start out and they go into season one, their first season, racing all these giants that have done the professional racing a long time with this mindset: we're just going to learn. Season one is all about learning. And they do better than they expect. They finish second or third or something really, really respectable. And going into season two, something happens. They don't do these postmortems. They don't do the after action reviews. They don't question what led to the success. They just assume, okay, we got all that stuff figured out. Now we're going to tweak about 100 different things. And then the next season, it's not an outright disaster, but they don't finish as well. And they realize, man, we've got to go back to, like, we don't even know what we learned from the failure now because we never paid attention to what we learned from our successes. So these sorts of things play out all the time, I think. And we're just lucky enough if we get to stay in the game.
Very interesting because, I run into so many entrepreneurs who are quote unquote successful, but they're never really growing at the speed that they could potentially be growing at. They're comfortable. And so they're not doing this. Now, when you talk about 2 hours a week to kind of do nothing, think about strategy, confirming you're climbing the right mountain, is that 2 hours in one chunk, or is that broken up over several days?
Yeah, I would like to hear your perspective on this. For me, I need the 2 hours in a chunk. Like, I have to be there. I've got to focus in, and I've got to spend, maybe it's 2 1 hour blocks. I don't know. allegedly, I do not know that I trust or believe these people, but some people are allegedly really good at time blocking and can go deep thought in 15, 20-minute increments. That is not Brad Harris. So I'm kind of curious. I know I'm supposed to be the expert here, but
No, it's fine.
What do you think this?
When you say that about some people are the expert about clearing their mind for 15 minutes or whatever, it reminds me of reading that JFK could go to sleep for 2 minutes. He could boom, be asleep for 2 minutes in between meetings. And that was the way he was able to maintain his hectic schedule. I can sleep anywhere, but 2 minutes and pop back. I don't know. Well, I'm curious for a couple of reasons before I answer. First of all, you may have heard me say, if you said you listen to a few podcasts, I bring it up fairly often, but where I first came up with my idea for sanctuary time, which is kind of what you're talking about in some regards, is that Lee Iacocca, when he turned around Chrysler, would take 2 hours, same time frame you gave, 2 hours alone in his study every Sunday night to basically say, okay, how did I do on my plan last week? What's the new information? What are the challenges I got this week to keep the company afloat? What's my plan? So I think your 2 hours time frame is right. I think that whether it's 2 hours plus or whether it's a shorter period, maybe an hour, and then it's broken down, I think a daily accountability session, like I described with Sanctuary, and I use this map format that's kind of consistent with your mountain climbing. It's how do you get to the destination, where you have that self-accountability each day of, am I on the right mountain? Or did I waste too much time in things that somebody else could have done? Or I followed some shiny object, whatever. And then so you've got accountability, and then you move into, okay, what's the new stuff today? And actually, John David Latta was on the podcast, and he shared that the only way he could finally get to sleep at night, and he had some other issues going on, was that he has developed a habit that hasn't changed for over a decade now. Every day before he goes to sleep, he's planned his next day. And mentally for him, now you're a psychologist, I'm curious about this. Mentally for him, that enabled him to stop thinking about tomorrow, so he could rest. Then in the morning, he kind of checks any new information, emails, my wife come up with a different idea or whatever. He adjusts it a little bit, but by doing that, so I think there's a daily component, but I think the weekly component is extremely powerful. And I'm going to be candid to you in the audience. It's a struggle for me. I do the daily pretty well. Okay. But that hour or more each week, I'm scoring in the single digits on 100% scale. Not good.
Yeah. What we're talking about is definitely one, and a lot of what I talk about. And when I get more time with people, I stress this over and over and over. One, we got to be kind to ourselves on these sorts of things, so we don't get in a cycle of, this is fatalistic, I'll never get it. But these are things that are simple but not easy. We know what we're supposed to be doing. We know all these things. But if they were easy, we wouldn't have to have podcasts. I've written 2 leadership books, which adds to the, 1 bazillion leadership books that get written every single year. We wouldn't need these sorts of things if these things were simple and easy. So I'm with you there. This idea of the only way you can go to sleep if you jot down your next steps for the next day is pretty consistent with this idea that it's not necessarily the plan or anything like that that's magic. It's this idea that we really, really struggle with uncertainty. It makes us uneasy. Usually we frame uncertainty in the negative, all these sorts of things. One of the things that I just moved a few months ago to Paris, France, from Fort Worth, Texas, which is just a slight cultural change. But one of the things I did to onboard myself was reread Hemingway's A Movable Feast. And when we look back at Hemingway's life, there's a lot that we could say, maybe we shouldn't look to this person for leadership advice. However, he did have this one thing that helped him be a more productive writer. He never would stop writing until he knew what the next paragraph was supposed to be the next day. That sounds a lot like kind of the story that you're giving to help us chart a path and reduce some of that gray fog that we're wrestling with at all times when we're in a leadership role.
Well, I think it's interesting you bring that up because I say to people that, you can look at any leader like Stalin, who some historians estimate was responsible for 40 million people being killed, second only to Mao Zedong with 50 million. At the time Stalin was in control of Russia, they were they were number one industrial nation in the world. Now, he got there by killing people and different things. But, we can learn something from any leader, but not necessarily adopt everything, in their life type of thing. And I encourage people to look at that. I mean, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, they were incredible at propaganda. They were absolutely awful in many ways. But there's things to learn about that may be bad. Not, we got to watch out for that. But I love what you're saying, but I'd like to go back to the mountains.
Okay.
Because I'm fully in your camp, Brad, that I think this is one of the biggest challenges for leaders. When you become a leader, it's really easy to be busy. And kind of like, to use your analogy, it's really easy to climb a mountain. But this whole concept of realizing you're on the wrong mountain, even though it may be a great mountain, but it's the wrong mountain. And I like your idea, the mentoring board. And then if you're talking about, a couple hours a week, do you have any thoughts on if I spend a couple hours a week where I'm really going to focus on strategy and holding myself accountable to, you said 2 or 3 things. Gary Keller calls it the one thing in his book, where he says 20 hours a week on the one thing. If I spend 2 hours, sorry, I'm getting to my practical, slightly OCD side. If I spend 2 hours a week on the strategy side, how much time do you think I'm going to save avoiding things that are sucking time out of my calendar in the upcoming week?
Oh, geez. How much time are you going to save? Well, AstraZeneca, we've heard of this really big company, recently did an exercise where they felt like they've got too much clutter on people's calendars, and they spent 2 years trying to focus all of their employees, their whole employee workforce, and they ended up now saving, I think, just over 2 million employee hours by cutting meetings that added zero value. So what does that do if we kind of distill that down to a single CEO? I don't know. I think we can cut off, if we spend 2 hours and we get real clear about what matters. And if you can do one thing, that's awesome. I feel like 2 or 3 gives people a little bit of an out to say, like, I actually don't know the one thing, but I know 2 or 3 that, like, at least we can get there. I'd venture to guess, and this is just a guess, no science behind this, you're going to get 40 to 50% of your tactical time back. And it's like, it's not magic, but if you can really be disciplined about this, a few things happen. One, when we're facing complexity, uncertainty, actually when we're scaling or starting up a business, like, we really need our team to be empowered and take ownership of things. The number one thing that I see leaders do that screws up empowerment, and look, I can tell you it's going to like, when I do exec ed with big companies, I can leave the room with a pretty good deal of certainty that whatever I just taught about empowerment isn't going to work. And maybe it's because I'm an ineffective teacher that day or something like that, but it's probably because I watched the CEO jump in and speak first every single question that was asked in the group. But so if you're taking this time, I guess where I'm going with this in a roundabout way, is that means that's time that you're not out there with your hands in everybody else's work. And you're giving them the space to be autonomous and figure things out. So I'm saying 40 to 50%. I don't know. Would you peg that higher or lower?
So I think of my calendar, and I think that I would just embellish your estimate a little bit in that I may not free up 40 to 50%, but like meetings I have set, I'm all against, if you don't have an ROI in the meeting, you're not getting something or giving something, don't be there. Another conversation. But think of those meetings you have one-on-one with your people. And so direct reports. So right now I'm doing a gig for a client and I'm managing over 100 people, and like 70% of them, 60% of them are in India. So, but my direct reports, I know that if I spend time and think strategically, like what you're talking about, before I have each meeting, I'm going to get much more out of that meeting, and the person I'm working with is going to get much more out. So it may not actually free up 40 to 50%. I would think it's going to open up 10 to 20%, but it's also going to take the other meetings that you have scheduled or the other activities you have scheduled. If you strategically think through, what's the most important thing here? And maybe you had 13 things on the agenda and you consolidate it down to 2 or 3 or 5, because strategically, if you spend more time on that, you're gonna help that person a lot more. I mean, does that sound like it has any weight?
Yeah. Even hearing you talk about that, first of all, great response. I'm jealous of it. I wish I would have said it. It's probably not so much a time saver in terms of like freeing up your calendar so that you can go get boba tea with your spouse or something like that. It's more of like, this is an amplifier, or this is sort of a leverage thing that you can get more impact out of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And where I see on that is, I see that if I spend that 2 hours, if I do it right, the way you're recommending, I'm probably going to gain, I don't think it's an exaggeration, I think I'm going to gain 10 hours of throughput with my team, because I'm going to be more focused in each of those activities that I'm kind of reviewing. Do I need to be in this, or should I not be in this? Should I be doing this? Should I not be doing this? What's going to have the biggest impact? So I'm actually a minimum of 10 hours upside, I think. Somebody would see. And going back to your original premise, part of this may be that at some point, I'm going to realize I'm on the wrong mountain.
Yeah.
Which might be it might be a major division of our business, might be a big piece of our business. But I'm realizing, hey, when I look at the profit margins, when I look at, the impact, look at where we are in the market, whatever criteria, if I take the time without distraction, I always say that, without distraction, that's what you're talking about, right? This 2 hours, nothing can interrupt you. No text, instant messages, emails, that all has to be turned off.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It's focus time. And the jury is still very much out on whatever Meta is doing, but waking up on the wrong mountain sounds absolutely terrifying to me, not just from a business perspective, but it just feels humiliating to wake up on the wrong side of the mountain. But recently I've been wondering, you keep using this phrase of the wrong mountain. Is Zuckerberg, or is the Meta leadership team feeling right now with how the metaverse is going or not going? Are they at least questioning, are we headed up the right mountain? And, I don't know if 2 hours is going to solve that issue for those guys, but it's difficult. We carry a lot of baggage. We double down on decisions when we know they're wrong. We chase sunk costs. We've got all of these things going in our heads, and we got our egos involved in all sorts of stuff. So yeah, this is totally a mess.
Yeah. So I think you're bringing up something really powerful here right now, and that is, and I don't want to pick on Zuckerberg and the team. So not because I think they're doing everything right, but I can tell you from my own experience that my biggest mistakes have been when I wanted to prove that I was right, and I really blindly believed in something, and really it was broken, but I wasn't spending this 2 hours. And I wasn't really looking at the numbers. I wasn't looking at what was happening and really understanding. And I was, like you said, I was doubling down because of my bias, and I wouldn't talk to people who had a different opinion, or if I did, I'd dismiss it. And I think that's one of the key things. So you go to your mentoring board, having people that are strong enough to say, hey, you're wrong. You need people that are, because some people will set up the mentoring board with yes men, right?
Yeah, happens all the time.
Yeah. Well, my mentors all agree with me. I see that now, and I'm going to be candid with you. I'm very devoted in my faith as a follower of Jesus, but I see now, you see some of these mega church pastors, they don't have a church board. They have an advisory board of other mega church pastors. And now you're seeing them. Some guy put a YouTube thing out there. where you're seeing these pastors who are wearing $1,000 shoes and $3,000 sport jackets. And it's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? This is, so it's, and I think, forgive me for picking on them, but they're an example of somebody who's really they're climbing the wrong mountain. And, it's really sad. So it's just, I've been there, done that. Now, one of the things we like to talk about, Brad, is how our guests have overcome some big change point, tipping point, whatever. Do you have anything you want to share that's like, I mean, it sounds like you're just super solid and you're doing some great work, but have you gone through something in your life where it's like, it didn't go well and you overcame that challenge that you might want to share with our audience?
Yeah, I anticipated something like this was coming and still not prepared. So I'm really glad that I'm projecting competence to you, because inside it does not feel like that. I'm very much a sufferer of imposter syndrome. By the way, quick aside, I know this Preachers and Sneakers account, this Twitter account.
That's right. That's what it is. Yeah,
one of the best leadership and startup, or it's even, I make parallels back to like venture capital based companies, podcast that's out there besides yours, of course. Is this one by Christianity Today called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, and it talks about Mark Driscoll. But it is just amazing how we circumvent these accountability processes and we create these cultures that work in the short term, but are really disastrous later. So what's my story? I am a constant work in progress. I'm a runner. I have these old Nike posters all over my work office that say there is no finish line. That's sort of my mantra. I think the first time I got my butt kicked was in late 2014. My wife and I were expecting our second child. I think I was okay. I was projecting confidence or competence at my work, which is at the University of Illinois at the time. We got a really terrible diagnosis for our daughter. It's an extremely rare genetic condition called Cri-du-Chat. It affects about 1 in 50,000 to 1 in 100,000 babies, was associated with severe disabilities, delays, all sorts of things, lifelong care. She was born in early 2015, but there was a season, and I don't really even know how to peg how long it was, but we're talking months, if not years, where I had all the stuff put together of what I was projecting to the outside world, but inside of me, it was not right. I was not living up to my values, and I'm still on the way back to that. So I think if there's any lesson that I can get from that, and I'm really not comfortable saying like I've got it figured out or anything like that. It's like sometimes you just got to keep it together enough to stay in the game, but don't quit. But second of all, I benefited immensely from not like breaking down in a really embarrassing way or anything like that, but from being vulnerable and having people, experts in my field, but also outstanding human beings that I didn't know that side of them yet, at the University of Illinois, and also colleagues in my broader research space. And so I guess I'm rambling a bit. It's hard to talk about, but I think if you really want to be who you want to be, you've got to have the courage to figure out how to be vulnerable and when to say, I don't got this. I don't have this figured out. And again, it's about sometimes just putting one foot in front of the other. And that's probably the best I can give you on the spot like that.
Well, I think it's awesome. I think that you said two things that I think are really wise. One thing is kind of back to Teddy Roosevelt talking about the fighter in the ring. You got to stay in the ring. You got to stay in the game. Although you do need your breaks at times, right? To get a water break, refresh, clear your mind. But the other thing that you alluded to that I think is super wise is that you're not there yet. I'm 65. I'm not there yet. I'm still learning. I've learned things in this podcast. I learn things each time. And one of the hardest things for me to learn was that I couldn't make success be like turning on a light bulb. I couldn't make learning a life lesson like turning on a light bulb. I didn't learn it, click, I learned it. And I think that that's a hard lesson in our quick pitch society. goes against the grain, that we can learn something and go, oh, wow. But then we're just starting on that journey. It's not, oh, I got it now. So I think you sound awesome. I love what you're teaching. I'm sure you're really good with people as a sounding board and guiding them. You have some great experience. Your personal journey is I'm sure helped you a lot and melds in it. Do you have anybody ever tell you what they tell me? Because you're actually qualified for it. They say, Dave, I don't know whether you're my coach or my therapist. Do you ever have any of your leaders tell you that? Because you actually could be the therapist.
I have found that line is extremely hard to find between therapy and coaching sometimes.
That's right. Because what you're training affects their personal life and who they are, as well as some habits, some behaviors, some processes. So that's really cool. So you're in Paris now.
Right.
And what exactly are you doing and how are you working with people? Because I understand if you're in Texas and you're doing leadership stuff and professional stuff, what led you to go to Paris and what are you doing?
Yeah, my wife and I always sat around and we watched House Hunters when the kids go to bed and thought we should do some international moves. That was part of it, coming off the heels of COVID. I took a job at a business school here that's really respected called HEC Paris. So I'm a professor of management and human resources here. That's my real job. And then on the side or in whatever free time I have, that's when I'm coaching and I'm trying to help people, mostly involved in scale-up organizations, but I'm really helping them scale up their own leadership game. So that's how we ended up in Paris. But I guess now we're a worldwide brand, huh?
That's great. That's great. Well, if people want to learn more about you, Brad, where do they go?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. They can find me on LinkedIn, Brad Harris. I think the URL is LinkedIn, Brad Harris, PhD. If I can help people, I'm always willing to respond and try. If I can't, I will tell you, this is not my space. Another place is peopleleaderaccelerator.com. This is a group I co-founded with Andrew Bartlow, Carmela Krantz, and Marie Schutz. And we're there to help HR leaders at startups and scale-ups get the leadership training they need to be really strategic partners.
Fabulous. Hey, well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think it's been a great discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you like the episode with Brad, please subscribe. Hey, we'd love your feedback. Any type of feedback you got, we'd love to hear it. Also, don't forget our sponsor, habitly.com. That's a great place for you to build your leadership skills. Brad and I talked about today. There's some unique ones you can learn on habitly.com. And again, thanks for joining us. Stay tuned. We've got more great guests coming. Bye for now.